Hi, it's Neil here. Before we start today's show, I wanted to let you know that I've teamed up with my friends at HireEct this month. And HireEct is the first chat-based hiring app for startups. And what I love about HireEct is it takes everyone away from the dreaded email inbox and waiting around for responses. Think of it like WhatsApp for recruiting. And the HireEct app brings together recruiters and job seekers so they can directly connect with each other. And this allows recruiters and job seekers to communicate more and receive quick feedback. And the HireEct app also uses advanced technology to efficiently map job seekers and recruiters, all based on their preferences and behaviour. So you can improve your chances of reaching inbox zero, accelerate your hiring process 10 times faster than those traditional ways, all by chatting and interviewing candidates anytime, anywhere, on any device. So I invite you all to download the HireEct app for free from the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. That's HireEct, spelled H-I-R-E-C-T. Give it a try, let me know what you think. But on with today's show.
Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, everyone right now is talking about how much the world has changed in the last 2 years, but today I want to explore how our expectation for our humble home internet has increased. Wi-Fi is no longer just about killing a few hours when we get home from work, endlessly scrolling down a phone or tablet. It's now fundamental to every aspect of our home. In some cases, it can be doorbells, lighting, heating, 4K streaming, online gaming, Zoom calls, and a long list of smart devices that are all hungry for a slice of bandwidth. Until something buckles and inevitably somewhere in the house people will say, the Wi-Fi's slow again. But much of the cause of this is not for the reasons that you might expect. So today I've invited one of my favourite guests back onto the show from Zen Internet. And I wanted to talk about how their latest research is suggesting that an incredible 75% of people are unaware that microwaves could be interfering with their internet connection. And rebooting the router or hitting the router is not the best solution. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, where once again myself and Paul Stobart will be sitting down and sharing insights and maybe offering a few tips on something that affects just about everybody listening, I suspect, our home Wi-Fi. So a massive warm welcome back to the show. But for anyone that missed our previous conversation, can you just remind the listeners with a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Neil. Yes, I'm Paul Stobart. I'm Chief Executive of Zen Internet, where I've been for about 3 or 4 years.
Fantastic. And Zen Internet, as a quick refresher, almost previously on the Zen Internet podcast episode, you guys service 80,000 plus customers, and this is largely down to your fundamental ethos of putting happiness and people ahead of short-term gains, which is so refreshing to hear, especially in the internet business. But what's been your big focus since we last spoke?
Oh, I think the focus has been maintained on looking after our people as best we can. I mean, I think our philosophy is very clear. You know, if our people are fired up and enthused, engaged, well-led, inspired in what they do, and can understand how what they do relates to the strategic objectives we have, then surprise, surprise, they're going to feel good about things and customers will get a great experience. And if customers get a great experience, then more often than not, they're going to stay loyal, they're going to buy more from you, they're going to recommend you to others, and that leads ultimately to financial performance. But it's really focusing on people first that leads to a great customer experience that then leads to financial reward. And so that's why we've always had this people first, customer champion ethos about us, and that served us well through this dreadful COVID period.
And I think during that COVID period, many people will have had a bog standard internet connection and it served them well for a few hours at night. But of course, now they're asking so much more from that internet connection with smart devices, Zoom meetings, 4K streaming, etc. And one of the things that I've noticed is many people are increasingly complaining about slow Wi-Fi. And even in a neighbourhood watch group that I find myself in, one of the questions I see popping up every few nights is, why is anybody having trouble with company A's broadband? And I've got the same problem with company B. But I read that Zen Research recently found that 75% of people are unaware that actually microwaves could actually be interfering with their internet connection, with 1 in 12 wrongly believing that just hitting their router will improve connectivity. But can you expand on these findings and finally lay a few myths to rest here?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, and we certainly don't advise bashing routers in the hope that they will somehow spring back into life. That is really not what to do, although I guess from time to time it's quite tempting. I mean, look, the truth is that the more devices we have in our homes that are Internet of Things related, the more electronic kit we have in our homes, then the more likelihood there is that you're going to interfere with the Wi-Fi signal. I mean, Wi-Fi is radio wave, right, going through your home, and you have to be careful with radio waves to make sure they don't get interference. So even if you have a second router as a business line, that can cause untold havoc with your residential line and vice versa. A microwave absolutely operates on a similar frequency to some routers. And so therefore you can have interference from that perspective too. You've got to be very careful where you place the router. Unfortunately, many of these devices are not that aesthetically pleasing, right? They're just lumps of clunky plastic. And so you hide them behind your desk or in a cupboard or somewhere out of the way. And actually that's the worst thing you could possibly do. In ideal terms, you want to have your router in the center of your house, which of course sounds great from an engineer's perspective, but may not be great from what you want in your living space. So there are compromises to be held and to be had in order to make sure that the signal that you get throughout the home is right. But the more that you investigate what your router is capable of providing you in terms of data, then the more you can check to see how many devices you've got on your home network, and to switch those off that you don't really need, because they'll all be doing some sort of, they'll all be having an effect to some extent on what you have as your signal in the home. So you need to make sure that you look out for walls and vacuums within glass frames. I mean, all kinds of activities that can hold back the Wi-Fi signal. So it's becoming a real science to make sure that your Wi-Fi signal is strong.
And you made a great point there a moment ago about people having a second business line in their house to try and solve the problem. And I was interested, you said that can actually make the problem worse, because I've noticed a lot of the big broadband providers are heavily advertising now this business broadband for the home, as everyone's working from home now, and it seems very appealing. So that's not necessarily the answer either.
Not if it's a separate router and a separate line and a separate everything. That can very often be more of a problem than a solution. Better to have a guest Wi-Fi on your same router. That's the more effective way of doing it, and that way you can secure signals. So, I think increasingly, and thank goodness for the rollout of full fiber, homes that are very dependent on smart devices need higher and higher speeds and more bandwidth in order to be able to cope with the requirements of modern living, particularly in a COVID environment. But even with the fastest speeds, if you've got a gig coming into your wall because you're using one of the alt nets, that doesn't mean to say that your Wi-Fi signal is going to be that great in the home. Because you may be trying to fire radio signals through thick walls or through some other kind of obstruction. Or you might have other electronic devices interfering. All of these things can play havoc. So more often than not, you need some sort of help. And that's actually why Zen is trialing its own field engineer force, which will actually be there to visit our customers' homes to help them with with the Wi-Fi. I mean, increasingly we see ourselves not as an internet service provider, but as a Wi-Fi service provider, because the internet service provision is only a tiny part of what's going on these days. These days, it's all about Wi-Fi in every room in the house to the best possible optimal signal strength. And so that's why we're trialing this Zen Engineer field force that can help our customers get optimal Wi-Fi in their homes.
And I think if we were to go back 5 years ago, the average home would have maybe a couple of phones, laptops and tablets connected. But now, of course, everything from doorbells, entertainment, lighting, even toasters are connected to the internet. And as our homes continue to fill with these smart devices, do you think homeowners should start moving some of those smart devices to a separate network with limited bandwidth to protect things like those corporate Zoom meetings and 4K streaming in the home? And do you think it will ever get easier for home users with limited technical knowledge to do that and manage it themselves without an IT department or support line?
I think if you've got the right speed coming into the home and you treat your Wi-Fi not as something that is just there and is expected to work, but as something that you as a homeowner need to manage, just like you would manage the devices that you buy and you install in your home. Yeah. I mean, a router is just like that. I'm afraid these days, with the amount of demand on Wi-Fi, you have to manage it like you would manage your boiler and your gas and your everything else that you have in your home. It's become part and parcel, I'm afraid, of what's required. That's why we think some of our customers may wish some help from us in order to get the optimal solution. But I think if you have the right speed coming into the home, and you manage your electronic devices within the home sensibly, I mean, not every day, but clearly, you take a roll call of what you're using and how everything's working every month or so, then you'll be in good shape.
And back to that Zen research, I also read that you found that half of the UK regret failing to take up new activities during lockdown. And most importantly, from your point of view, 1 in 7 have regrets about not switching broadband providers over the last year. Did that surprise you?
Yeah, lockdown was such a weird time, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, it was the sort of period when we thought it might be over in a couple of months. And so many of us didn't actually do much with our time. We were just sort of nursing our wounds. But others of us took advantage of the opportunity and did lots of different things that were perhaps pastimes and hobbies that we wanted to do for a long time. And then, of course, it just extended, didn't it? I mean, it became a sort of apparently unending period, which was exhausting and very difficult for all of us to manage. So those who got ourselves organized early on and took up new pursuits were able to use the time profitably. And others of us, I suppose, regretted the fact that we hadn't.
And one of the other things that stood out from the research was how potential home buyers are becoming fed up with unsightly technology. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, no, I think this is a real truth. I mean, it's all very well having these electronic devices in the home, but if there's spaghetti wire everywhere cluttering up the home, and anyone who's ever tried to dust spaghetti wire knows how difficult it is. I mean, it just accumulates dust fantastically. So that looks unsightly. And then the routers, as we were saying earlier, I mean, they're not that pretty either. I think there's a lot of work that could be done to improve the aesthetics and the look and the appeal of some of these electronic devices and equipment. So, I think it's true. I think that's one of the reasons that people try to tuck routers away into cupboards and make them invisible, because they don't really look that great. So I think the industry's got a job to do to make things more aesthetically pleasing and to give people more choice of the sorts of styles and approaches to these sorts of devices, because we want the devices to be actually part of the home, because if they're part of the home, then they'll provide the right kind of Wi-Fi signal, which will make customers happy. We don't want them to be ugly things that are shoved away into cupboards, because that way the Wi-Fi signal is not going to be that great and customers will be unhappy.
So much has changed in the last couple of years, and we've documented it in our previous conversation and this one today. But I think another big change is the desire around being more environmentally conscious, thinking about sustainability more. And of course, as we record this, it's something that's in the news on an almost daily basis now. But the reason I bring this up is I believe you're also on a mission to become the first broadband provider to go net zero by 2028. And that means it will remove more carbon emissions from the environment than it actually generates. But can you expand on that and why it's so important to you?
This really is a personal passion of mine, and I know everyone at Zen shares that passion. Increasingly, in fact, one of the things that I did during lockdown was to research climate change myself because I wanted to learn more about it. And what I discovered, I found truly horrifying. We simply have no time left, actually. Yeah. So I don't think 2028 for Zen to become net zero is necessarily acceptable, actually. I'm not sure why it takes or is going to take us that long. Mm. The planet has very little time left if we're going to save ourselves from some dystopian future that none of us would wish to have. And unfortunately, politicians and lots of other institutions have analyzed for the last 50 years. I mean, it's 50 years since we've known that human intervention is making a mess of the climate. And yet in 50 years, we've done nothing except increase the amount of fossil fuel we are firing into the environment and the amount of carbon emissions that we're depositing there. It's astounding. I mean, given that the science is clear and unequivocal, that if we don't do something about it, we're going to end up with global warming of 3, 4, 5 degrees or more by the end of this century, and well beyond that in the century after that, which could herald the end of the human race. So we're facing an existential threat. We've been facing it for 50 years, and we've done virtually nothing about it in real terms. Certainly in business, I'm embarrassed, I have to say. I'm embarrassed. I am 64. I've spent my entire working career turning pretty much a blind eye to the reality of climate change. And it's taken people like Greta Thunberg and others to wake me up and to make me realize, and to make all my colleagues at Zen realize, that we have no time left. And relying on carbon removal technologies and any other can that we can kick down the road is just not acceptable. The only sustainable, immediate way in which we can make a difference right now is to reduce carbon emissions immediately. And that means sourcing green in total. It means forcing or demanding supply chains upstream to go green. It means changing our fleets of vans and cars and trucks to become green. It means cutting our travel. It means doing everything we possibly can. Frankly, it means even little things like removing meat from canteen menus for a few days a week or half of the days in a week. It means looking at every single thing we have in order to reduce emissions. And we have to set an example. I'm not happy that 2028 is a sensible date. I don't understand why I have to wait that long. We are hell-bent on making the reductions that we need to make immediately so that we can do our bit to try and help save the human race. By the way, the point here is the planet. People talk about saving the planet, right? It's not about saving the planet. The planet will be fine. In the Eocene period, as I'm sure you know, 50 million years ago, temperatures were 13 degrees above where they are today. Both of the poles were free of ice. There were palm trees growing in the Arctic. So the planet has had this sort of temperature before, no problem. The problem is the human race and all of the other species of animals and insects and plants that we will destroy along the way as we head towards that sort of destruction. The planet will recover, the human race won't. We need to take action now. So you can tell I feel very passionately about the subject.
No, that passion really comes across, and for the right reasons too. I mean, the world is just collectively waking up after, like you say, 50 years of slumber, really. And as people do wake up and try to make that difference and try to save the planet again, what excites you or makes you hopeful about the future and the role that technology is going to play in fixing some of those problems?
I think as the realization around the seriousness of the situation with climate change becomes clear, actually technology has a fantastic role to play. So we need immediately, as I was saying earlier, to reduce carbon emissions dramatically, frankly, by half. And that's an immediate requirement on all businesses, all consumers, everybody. But beyond that, we also need to keep working on the technological solutions to the crisis of climate change. One of those is all of the recent developments and investments in hydrogen. Hydrogen is one of the great answers to the problem of replacing fossil fuel. It's not appropriate in all circumstances, but it will be for a lot of transportation, logistics, any kind of industrial process that requires extraordinarily high temperatures, which electricity on its own can't do, but hydrogen fuel can. So hydrogen has a place, but governments have got a responsibility to subsidize both the supply side and the demand side to ensure that hydrogen becomes a reality. But the technology is there and rapidly developing. I think carbon removal techniques, there's a fantastic carbon removal from air facility, which is called Orca, just opened in Reykjavik in Iceland, which is it's magical. I mean, it removes 4,000 tons of carbon from the atmosphere every year, which is an extraordinary feat. And replica Orcas can be set up in multiple places. But if we were to remove the amount of carbon that we're merrily belching into the atmosphere with our fossil fuel emissions, by using Orcas, we'd have to build 9 million of them, which means in this country, we'd have to have 50,000, which means we'd have to have 5 times as many as we've got wind turbines. And given these things occupy an acre each, you can see how impractical that is. But it is part of the solution. And I think the other thing I would say, which perhaps may be more controversial, is that there is absolutely a place for nuclear. Nuclear is one of the, bizarre as though this may seem, one of the safest energy sources there is around. It's a bit like people say it's safer to go on an aeroplane than it is to cross the road. And it's true. Yeah. In the case of nuclear energy, nuclear is safe. Yes, we've had 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima, but they were 3 terrible, awful, ghastly accidents from which enormous learnings have been taken. And technologically now, nuclear fuel, nuclear energy is one of the safest environments with very little waste, which can be managed. And it is a tremendously good answer to the energy desires and demands of the future. So I think technology has a role to play in all those ways as we go forward.
I completely agree with you. And here in 2021, some people, especially listening in the UK, may have seen a company called Fibre, could have been working in their street, digging it up, not understanding why. So can you tell me a little bit more about how, with help from you guys at Zen, they're actually extending the infrastructure to 216 additional towns and villages across Britain, actually delivering gigabit speed broadband and ensuring that everyone has access to that full fibre and those fast speeds that are probably taken for granted in some of the bigger cities?
Yeah, no, Fibre are, I guess, the largest of the altnets that are appearing on the scene. And they have a fabulous product, which is basically a synchronous gig product. So it's 1 gig up, 1 gig down. And as you say, they have a very ambitious program to roll out full fibre with that gig service to a whole raft of cities and towns across the UK. We have a partnership with Fibre. We enjoy working with them. We've been trialing their services across 4 cities, Newcastle, Leicester, Ipswich and Worthing down on the south coast. And we've been very pleased with the results. We've been very pleased with the partnership. We've been very pleased with the speed of installation, deployment, the customer service at point of installation. And we're hopeful that we can extend that agreement and arrangement to a national framework agreement in the next, perhaps in the next few weeks or months, in order to cement our relationship with Fibre as a genuine alternative to obviously the major provider in the UK, which is Openreach, with whom I have to say we also have a very, very good and thriving relationship. So I think the altnets have a real role to play, and we should welcome their arrival. They're creating great competition and giving the consumer and internet service providers choice, which is fabulously important.
And I'm curious, with 5G access increasing and almost every mobile provider telling their consumers that, hey, you don't need cables, you don't need installation now, what do you think the future of broadband will look like?
I think 5G is going to become a complementary technology to fixed line access. I don't ever think, and maybe I'm biased because I come from the fixed world, but I don't think that 5G will replace it. And there are technological reasons for that. I mean, if you really want to get very, very high speeds with 5G, you need to be in line of sight with the mast. So that's not always practicable. And within the home, we know that 5G suffers greatly if it's trying to go through a wall or some other kind of obstruction, to a far greater extent than would be the case with fixed line and Wi-Fi. So I think fixed line would always have the advantage on speeds and latency, but that doesn't mean to say that I'm poo-pooing the idea of 5G altogether. Quite the contrary. I think it's a very, very sensible complementary technology. Actually, in the fullness of time, I could see convergence taking place. But of course, if that's going to happen, it needs big shifts in the underpinning technologies, because physically they're different. So we've got some way to go for that. And we've got some way to go, frankly, before 5G itself deploys in the market, probably 2 or 3 years yet. So I think 5G has a place, but I don't think it will replace our reliance on fixed line.
And at the very beginning of our conversation, we talked around a lot of the challenges around smart homes, battles for bandwidth, etc. And you did briefly mention something about the research that you're doing, what you're working on, and overcoming some of those challenges. Can I just ask that you share a little more about that and the kind of things that excite you about the road ahead?
I think the most interesting aspect of what's going to happen going forwards is not so much what happens outside the home, it's what happens inside. And that's the point I was making earlier about the distinction between internet service provision, if you like, and Wi-Fi service provision, which I think is the new world. I think we have for too long assumed that our remit ends at the router, and it doesn't. Our remit increasingly for very demanding consumers, and let's not forget that the per capita increase in bandwidth in the last year has been, in our case anyway, on our network, 85% growth. That's per capita increase in consumption of bandwidth. I mean, that's astonishing. Now, part of it, of course, is driven by the fact that more people have been at home and working from home, but it's a sign to the future. And therefore, it means that more and more customers are going to be wanting more and more help and assistance inside the home. So in the right way, with the appropriate propositions and the right engineering expertise and customer service, we at Zen, along with all of our competitors, need to be ready to provide those kinds of services. And they're very different for us, and it's a whole new world, but it's a new world of opportunity, and customers will be very happy to pay for it because they're frustrated with what they can't get at the moment. And so I look forward to the opportunity of, in a sense, getting closer to the customer and providing more and more customer benefits as we go forward over the next few years.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back on the podcast today. We could talk for absolutely hours about this topic. We've covered a lot in a short amount of time, but one of the things that has changed since our previous conversation is I now like to ask my guests if there was a particular song or piece of music that has inspired them in their career, accompanied them in their career, or helps them get their head in the zone before going on stage or landing a big meeting. Is there a song and story you can share with us? And I'll add that song to our Spotify playlist.
Yeah. So I suppose, I mean, you'll probably, and your listeners will probably laugh, but I always have found an old Cat Stevens song that takes you back, doesn't it?
Yusuf,
which is very famous and was famous at the time. In fact, the song itself was written, I think, in the 30s. It's "Morning Has Broken," which is a song that's actually played sometimes at funerals, for goodness sake. But I find "Morning Has Broken," and I don't know if you know, but the original piano on that piece was played by Rick Wakeman, who was, of course, part of the amazing prog rock band Yes, of which I was a ridiculously impassioned fan back in the day. And in fact, if you want to hear Morning Has Broken as a piano piece, you need to listen to the Rick Wakeman version in 2016 on his Piano Recitals album. It's absolutely amazing. But I find the song Morning Has Broken is just inspirational. I mean, going back to what I was talking about climate change earlier, you know, the beauty of our planet, the stunning nature of a morning, and as the sun breaks through the clouds or the landscape or provides dappled light through the trees, the beauty of the flowers. I mean, I just think these simple things, the wonder, the gorgeousness of nature, as epitomized by that song, I always find uplifting. I always find it a tremendous inspiration. But there is a sadness also to the song, which is why I guess it's played at funerals. It's a beautiful balance between the sadness of the voice and the inspiration of the lyrics. And I find it very moving. And it's something I return to time and time again to get me and to get my mind in the right place to address the tasks of the day.
Wow, what an amazing choice. An even better story behind it. Thank you so much. I will get that added to our Spotify playlist. And for anyone listening, wanting to find out more information about Zen Internet, the research we've referenced today, or contact your team, what's the best starting point?
And on our website, zen.co.uk, and you'll find anything you need to find there and can get in touch with us from that point on.
Wow, man, we've covered so much today, not just about broadband, Wi-Fi, the future, but also the planet, the beauty of our planet, and how, yes, there are a lot of problems and a lot of challenges in every aspect of our lives now. There is this new world of opportunity, and I think it's something we're collectively waking up to, and hopefully we seize that opportunity. But more than anything, thanks so much for sharing it with me today.
Pleasure.
I think Paul's passion for his work really shines through, and I genuinely hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did today. But remember, this show is not about me and it's not about Paul. It's about hearing and sharing your insights, and I created this platform to give you a voice too. So anything we talked about today, whether you agree, disagree, have a different opinion, whatever it is, even if it's just a question or pitch to come on the show, I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. So techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. And if you want to work with me, my website is techblogwriter.co.uk. So a huge thank you to Paul for taking the time to come on this show again, and also for each and every one of you for keeping up with this rapid pace of interviews that we're getting at the moment, at least one a day, firing into your podcast feeds. And we'll do it all again tomorrow. So a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.